The first time I heard about Grow was back in 1995, and there was a friend of mine who'd just come out of 5B, which is the acute unit in Limerick, the acute psychiatric unit, and they'd heard about Grow in the acute unit, and they wanted somebody to go along to a meeting with them to give them a lift and stuff like that, you know. So I went to a group in Limerick where there happened to be two meetings in the same premises. So my friend went to one room and I went to the other room, you know. Um, and at the time, I was out of work at the time, in fact, and I was fairly new in Limerick, so I didn't really have any good connections around the place. So although I was only going, I suppose, to give my friend a lift and to support them on their journey for a few weeks, once I got into the meeting, I suppose it provided a way for me to connect with people, because that connection wasn't really freely available to me because I wasn't working, you know. And then I suppose once I was in the meetings for a few weeks, I realized actually that because I was out of work, my self-confidence was quite low. And so I found that dealing with getting involved in the group was quite beneficial to boost my self-esteem a bit. So that's kind of how I found out about Grow and first went to a meeting. So although it was kind of supposedly to help somebody else, I actually ended up helping myself in a sense.
Yeah.
You know, and an example of one of the things would be, I suppose, when you're looking for work, I suppose it's important that you're on the phone a lot, talking to people. And I suppose I just used to hate making phone calls. So one of the tasks that I would have got a lot in meetings would have been to phone somebody else in the group just for a quick chat, you know. And that would have been very beneficial to me, because it would have, if you like, eased me into making phone calls a bit more easily, like, you know. And
Yeah.
then I suppose over the years, then what happened was I suppose I kind of drifted away from Grow, but because I'd made connections there, I kind of stayed in touch with people, and I got involved in different things, like if they're having maybe a collection or a Christmas party or something like that, or some quiz or whatever, like I would go along. And then over the course of a number of years, I guess I kind of got then involved on the regional team, which is like the regional committee, if you like. And then I got involved, eventually then I got involved in the board then for the last number of years, like up until last year. So that's over the course of 1995 up until this year, which is at 25 years, you know. So it's on and off, been involved with about 25 years. Now there was a period actually during that time when I suppose I would have been struggling a bit, and I would have gone back to regular meetings for periods, you know. But I suppose at that stage I had young kids as well, so you know, dealing with managing young kids, you know,
Mm.
which is stressful enough. And then moving jobs and stuff like that, you know, I would have had moved jobs a few times. So there's a lot of stresses and strains that come up in life on a day-to-day basis, and I guess there were probably some fairly big stresses that would have happened in the last 20 odd years that would have impacted me. And if I hadn't have had, if you like, a Grow program or had people to talk to, they could have probably, you know, put me in a worse state of affairs, you know.
Yeah.
So if you like, if I hadn't had that in my life, then I might have ended up in a worse place, you know. So it was preventative, I suppose, in that sense.
A lot of members say it's a kind of lifelong thing, even if you're not attending regularly, you might be reading the program or keeping in touch with the people.
That's it. You say, yeah, I suppose you keep in touch with people and you bump into them here and there, and you try and, like, I suppose we didn't have the advantage of any weekends last year, but obviously in previous years there would have been the regional weekend and the national weekend, which are great opportunities to connect with people again who you mightn't have seen for a long time, you know. And it keeps that connection alive, and it gives, I suppose, people an opportunity then to give something back from something maybe that they would have benefited from, you know. In any group you're in, I suppose that, you know, the groups I was in for a while there was all kinds of different people for many different reasons. You know, it could have been, you know, bereavement or separation or you know, domestic violence, you know, as well as, you know, a range of kind of, you know, less serious kind of mental health problems, right down to fairly serious problems with, you know, people who were a little bit suffering from a bit of psychosis and stuff like that, you know. So within a group, you would get a whole range of people with different things, but I suppose everyone was able to connect. And the other thing was that I found quite interesting was that you would meet a very broad section of society in meetings, so from all walks of life, you know. Whereas if when you're normally when you're working, I suppose you generally tend to be working with people who are kind of similar to you. And similarly, when you go to school or college or whatever, you're kind of mixing with people who are broadly similar to you in makeup, or maybe similar in background, or in, you know, in social status or whatever. Like, but when you go to a Grow meeting, there's all kinds of different people in the meeting. So it's strange that group of people can connect on a level on very, very closely, I suppose. You know, it's quite interesting to see that, you know.
And you just mentioned their mutual support, because that's a big part, is supporting other people and not just getting the help yourself. And was there times when you felt like you were really helping somebody else, or that you could see other people helping each other, that kind of thing?
I suppose people feel good when they're helping somebody else. So to give somebody in a group the opportunity to either make a good suggestion for somebody else, or you know, tell them something that helped them in a similar situation, like, is really good. Like the group I was in, that they would have had, as well as people from a rural and urban mix, you would have had older people and younger people. So therefore, if you're like as a let's say as a new parent, if I had was dealing with trying to deal with toddlers or whatever it was, like, there would have been probably another parent in the room who would have gone through that phase, and they could have then, you know, given me a bit of advice. And similarly, I suppose if there were maybe some older people in the room who maybe weren't that comfortable with technology or something like that, then I could have, you know, tried to ease the, not, it would have been, I suppose back 20 years ago, it wouldn't have been so much the internet and email. It would have been more like mobile phones and sending texts and stuff like that. A lot of people wouldn't have been able to, you know, send and receive texts. So I suppose at least you could have helped an older person by showing them that actually sending and receiving a text is quite simple, and this is how you do it, you know, on your phone. So there's that kind of very simple sharing of skills, and sharing of ideas, and sharing of
It opens you up to your own strengths and abilities, because you can see where other people are struggling, you mightn't be struggling, and so
yeah,
it opens your eyes that way.
that's
Yeah.
very true, actually. I suppose that's the beauty of it, I guess, you know.
And then you chose step 7. Well, we asked you.
Step
So
7. So yeah, so we took
yes.
care and control of our bodies. Yeah, so I suppose I've always liked that step. You know, I guess as you get older in life, you kind of especially with me, I have a desk job, so I'm sitting down all day in front of a computer, and you know, if you're under stress, you're inclined to probably not look after your body, and maybe not eat the best things. You're just always snacking away, like, you know, and not getting any exercise, you know. So your back is then getting sore because you're sitting down all the time. So I suppose about 10 years ago, I said, well, this need to do something about this. And then I started to sort of saying, well, I'm getting older. I need to start looking after myself. So I started running there about 10 years ago, and I hadn't really, since I left school, the only bit of exercise I did was probably when I cycled a little bit when I was in college. And apart from that, I haven't, you know, I wouldn't be a big walker, so I wouldn't really go out walking many places. So I figured running was a good start, you know. It was difficult to start because I just kind of went off for a run. Probably ran a couple of 100 yards, and I was completely out of breath, you know. But I kind of stuck at it, you know. And I suppose I was lucky in that I had the space in my life to do it. I didn't have young kids to look after, so I had a bit of space after work in the evening, and I did find it was very useful, you know, when you come in from the office. Those are the days when you could actually come in from the office. Nowadays you're just stuck at home all day, like. But you come into the office, and then you could go off for half an hour and do something like that, and then at least it was a break between work and home, and as well as that, you're getting a bit of fresh air, a bit of exercise. I kind of nabbed a few guys in work to sponsor me a bit, so I raised a bit of money, and I kind of wore the grow shirt, and then I went for the Great Limerick Run, and I think it's quite a big event. It's kind of on the May bank holiday weekend, and I think for the event I was in, which was a 6-mile event, so there would have been maybe about 10,000 people running in that event. So a lot of people on the streets. The weather was quite nice, and when I finished that, I got a great buzz out of doing it. It was just the sheer buzz of doing it, and also the excitement of being part of a big event with thousands of people was really gets your adrenaline going.
Yeah.
And I suppose after that first 10K run, then I kind of got a bit addicted to it, and then I said, right, this is great, and then I started signing up for different events over the years, and I suppose my fitness would have improved then over time, and I suppose once you're doing something on a regular basis, then you're kind of you're watching the time and seeing, can I improve it a little bit next week? So you have a bit of motivation to sort of keep trying to improve. Maybe every month or two, I'd be going to a different event in a different part of the country to run a race, and you find you're going to events, you're meeting all kinds of different people, your world kind of gets much bigger. You're seeing new places, meeting new people, you're having chats with people who are total strangers, and that's all good for your self-confidence. So your self-confidence is improving because of the fact that you're out and about engaging with other human beings, I guess. So, and then you get the buzz out of it, and you get a shirt and a medal and a banana or whatever it is when you finish.
Banana. You'd want more than a banana, Rob. And do you think it helped clear your mind when you were running, when you go out running?
It does, yeah. I mean, a lot of people, when I go out running, a lot of people I find walking, there's people would wear headphones, and maybe they listen to podcasts and music, but for whatever reason, I never really liked wearing headphones when I was running, so I would just run without any kind of music or headphones. And I find that you just kind of you're plodding along, you're just listening to your steps on the pavement, you're listening to your breathing, and I suppose you get into a kind of a mindful state, I suppose, in a sense, in that you're not really, that's really, I suppose, what mindfulness is all about. Is about just I suppose not you're focusing on something, you're breathing, whatever, and that's probably when I come in, then you probably feel very relaxed because of that, because you feel very refreshed both in your head and in your body, and I suppose if you're working on a problem at work, you have a chance to kind of, your mind has a chance to go over it whilst you're running along, so it is good. It certainly helps me a lot in terms of my mental health,
I think it was Joan Rivers that said, "I've never seen a jogger smiling, and when I do, I'll go jogging." And that stuck with me, because I thought, I don't see them smiling, but I know that they get some benefit from it. And I have jogged myself in the past, but I think that it's not particularly obvious when you're out jogging that you're enjoying it. It's really when you come back, or I don't know.
It is. I mean, I think that they say, I think the first 10 minutes is quite painful, because quite often you might be a bit stiff, and it can be a bit sore. If you've been for a few runs during the week, it's a bit painful. When you start, that you're supposed to warm up. I never really warm up much. I just kind of go off and run slowly at the start. That's my warm up done, But after a while, you do. It's probably true what you're saying. It's only really afterwards where you get the benefit. I would be somebody who would be fairly shy, I suppose. I wouldn't be very very chatty with strangers. So I suppose when you getting involved in running, I suppose you're because you're meeting strangers, and you're forced to engage with people who you don't know, it does improve your confidence from that level, like, you know. Whereas if beforehand you would be inclined to say, well, sure, there's no point, it's grand, I don't need to go and talk to that person, I'm happy enough where I am, and you then stay in your own little bubble, rather than trying to, you know, pushing the boundaries out a little bit, which is what the Grow program is all about, pushing those boundaries out, and maybe doing something that's you're a little bit fearful of, you know, so that you can grow, because without pushing the boundaries out, you're not going to grow, you know. The other thing actually that there was the last couple of years, what's happened is, I would originally, when I'm training, I would have kind of run by myself most of the time, you know. The odd time I'd go running with another guy, another friend of mine. But in the last couple of years, I started getting involved in a thing called Park Run, which is all over the country, actually all over the world, but in Ireland, I think there's probably about 100 different park runs. And what they're not happening at the moment, obviously, because of the pandemic, but they're events that are held kind of locally where people can kind of walk or run like a little 5-kilometer route. And it's all free, it's all run by volunteers. But the main thing, like, is that you get you have a little piece of paper or a card where they can log your time, so you can then see your time, if you like, progressing from week to week. And I suppose there a couple of years ago I started getting involved with Park Run in Limerick and in Ennis, and that in itself, I suppose, is quite good, because not only are you getting the exercise, but then because it's run by volunteers, every so often, to keep the thing going, everybody who's participating really needs to volunteer every so often. So you volunteer to either be a marshal on the course, and maybe to record the time or whatever. And that again is part of the whole thing about you're giving something back. So you get you get a feel good factor, I suppose, out of doing that, you know. And then as well as that, I suppose there's a group called the Sanctuary Runners, which I kind of got involved with there a couple of years ago. And what that is it's a group of people who run with people who are living in the direct provision system in Ireland. So there's a lot of, like in Limerick and in Clare, there'd be a couple of direct provision centres with people who are seeking asylum. They're living in these centres, and they have very little engagement with the local population because of that. And the aim of the group is to get Irish people to run, kind of meet up and run, just go for a little run in solidarity with people who are living in direct provision. So I've been doing that for the last couple of years now. When I'm out running and you see somebody who's maybe clearly just started running and they're really struggling, and it gives you a great buzz to say, yeah, well done you, like, for doing that. You know, it's great to see that, you know, because everyone has to start somewhere. And it's good to see. I suppose it is good to see. We all learn by example, you know, especially when we're younger, we learn by example of our elders, you know. So eating is really important as well, like especially when you're running and stuff like that. But the problem with running is that you get very hungry, so you're inclined to eat a lot when you're running, which isn't a good thing sometimes. So you do have to be careful, you know. So the way I kind of manage that is I would be, you know, when I'm going to do this grocery shopping, I would kind of try to make a list. And so when I go shopping, I try not to buy rubbish, you know, because if there is rubbish in the house, you're going to eat it.
And really, when you have an exercise regime, you have to do the other things for it to work. You can't start not sleeping well or eating rubbish if you're trying to exercise. It doesn't really.
It doesn't.
They don't go
Yeah,
together.
it all goes together. Like, I suppose when you exercise, you probably tend to eat better, and you probably sleep better. And then similarly, when you're sleeping better, then you're more refreshed when you do go for a bit of exercise, you know.
The question that we ask everyone is, how would you sum up Grow in one word?
In one word?
Yes.
I suppose for me, it's probably connection. I suppose if I had a word to sum it up, from my own point of view, it's all about connection with people. You know, I've made some great friends in Grow over the years. Like, you know, we did a survey there a number of years ago to see how many people attending Grow lived on their own. And there was quite a high percentage of people attending Grow who did live on their own. So the weekly meeting was really important in terms of people being able to connect with another human being. Yeah. And I suppose the way mental health or mental illness goes is that, you know, sometimes if you're isolated, what happens is you start thinking in isolation, and then you start going off track. And it's only when you connect with somebody else who says, hang on a minute, that doesn't sound right, that they kind of, you can veer back on course again.